You know what happens when you hear that music? Of course, this is Talk City 91.1 FM on a beautiful Wednesday evening here in TNT. And when you hear that sound, you know it's only one thing coming your way. It's time for the Indaba program. And of course, today is another interesting discussion coming your way. And well, we will have our report from the Secretariat of the Emancipation Support Committee as they launches the second decade for people of African descent. But our feature discussion today, of course, is the Indigenous people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a special focus on Garifuna. And our guest, Dr. Gwen Nuñez-Gonzalez and Dr. Garrey Dennie. Of course, once again, let's join Dr. Fergus and Shabaka Kambon as they take us through for the next hour or so. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, my brother Ruskin. Once again, the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago welcomes all our listeners and viewers to another program of Indaba, the program where knowledge grows, a program of the Emancipation Support Committee. Special greetings to Ruskin at 91.1 FM. Of course, we are live on Talk City 91.1 FM, live on YouTube, and live on Facebook as well. There will be no Africa report this week, so we will be beginning with a report from the Secretary of the Emancipation Support Committee. In fact, we would be having the chair, no other person than the chair and CEO of the Emancipation Support Committee, Mrs. Zakiya Uzoma-Wadada, and she would be speaking on the forthcoming launch of the United Nations International Decade, the second decade for people of African descent. Now, following this report, we will be educated by two esteemed scholars on the history of the indigenous peoples of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as Ruskin would have told you, and we will be focusing particularly on the Garifuna, but we would be addressing the other indigenous group there, the Carinago, formerly called the Caribs. Some of them still identify as Caribs, but we would refer to them as Carinago. And these guests are Dr. Gwen Nuñez-Gonzalez, who is an educator, and Dr. Garrey Dennie, who is a professor of history. Now, we would have more on them later, but let me just tell you the context in which we are having them on the program this evening. For Vincentians, March is Heritage Month, National Heritage Month, and National Heroes Day is the 14th of March, I believe. They would correct me if I'm wrong on that. And on that day, Vincentians all across the nation, schools, institutions, everybody commemorate the great Garifuna chief Chatoyer. But they also remember the tragic story of the genocide of the Garifuna on the island of Baliso and the eventual exile on Roatan Island off the coast of Honduras. And from where they spread to Belize and other places. In fact, Dr. Gonzalez would be speaking to us from Belize this evening, and Professor Dennie would be speaking to us out of Maryland in the United States. So my two co-hosts, Renee, what do you have to say to our guests and listeners? And then we would go to Shabaka for his greetings to our audience. Renee.
Hi, good night, everyone. Good night, Dr. Fergus and Shabaka. I'm glad to be back here with you all again this week. Definitely looking forward to the discussion on the Garifuna as a history student. I've been doing history consistently since Form 3 when I had to pick subjects, and I've done it all the way to university level. So I'm definitely excited to hear this particular discussion. And I'm also excited to hear what ESCTT is going to do for the launch of the decade. I know personally what's going to happen, but I'm excited for everyone else to hear about it. Yes.
Yes, and of course,
That's a one short question for a short answer. Did you know about the Garifuna genocide while you were at UE or secondary school?
I knew about the genocide in general, but not in detail. So I did not know about that. It's Baliso.
Okay,
I
good.
Yeah, I did not know about that, but I know about their experiences in general.
Yes, Shabaka.
and of course tonight I look forward to asking a challenging question tonight. Some new information has come to me regarding the Garifuna people and some actions that they should take. And I want to see how our experts are going to treat with this information tonight. So I'm really excited as well to be part of this conversation. And let's see if we could get into the history and then find and the actions that we could take today to advance the Garifuna cause.
I just wondered before Ms. Zakiya comes on, I'm not sure if our hosts are aware and following, but the CARICOM Reparations Commission, the Center for Reparations Research, and I'm not too sure if the other collaborators are presently hosting a debate, regional debate for secondary schools. Of course, the topic is reparations. Quite a few of the Trinidad and Tobago schools that have entered are past participants of the African History Quiz that ESCTT's hosts. So I would like to say best of luck. It started Monday, the debate. I want to say best of luck to all the schools and all the students who are participating. I don't have favorites yet. I'm not going to just,
Well, Renee, we're going to look forward to an update from you on Indaba on what happens in there, and also to give our audience a link, to give them a link to how they could see those.
Right. So you can stream them live on the Center for Reparations Research YouTube channel. I have not been able to watch them live. This week has been a hectic week, but I'm definitely going to tune in because that's one of the best things about YouTube is that you can always come back and look at the videos. So I'm definitely going to tune in later on. And like I said, it's heavy Trinidad and Tobago, heavy Jamaica, but you have Curacao, you have the Bahamas, and there's also a British school. So I think it's very interesting that we've been able to get that topic of reparations in the schools to this degree. Because when I was, like I said, I've been doing history since Form 3, and I did not encounter the issue of reparations until I reached at university level. So I love that secondary school children are tackling and coming away and understanding why reparations is important.
Indeed. And on that subject, before we change topics here, let me let our listening audience know that we are also going to touch on the Trinidadian connection to the Garifuna genocide. There's a major Trinidadian connection to the Garifuna genocide and specifically the death of Chief Chatouye that we're going to reveal tonight on Indaba. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that.
Yes, indeed. There's another name I came up with. I don't know if we would have the opportunity to share it tonight. Another Trinidadian. Yeah, in fact, with roots that are still here in the country today. Yeah, so let's move on with the report. If we can bring in the chair of the Emancipation Support Committee to tell us about the launch on Friday. Yes, welcome, Sister Zakiya. And of course, we are going to hear about what's going on, the significance of this launch and the significance of the decade as well. So welcome and go ahead.
Zakiya,
you're muted. Unmute.
Yeah, then you're giving all the instructions to the guests and not doing it myself. Okay, so good night, everyone. And Thank you, Dr. Fergus. Thank you, Shabaka. On the 21st of March, which is Friday coming, the Emancipation Support Committee, in collaboration with the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus and the Trinidad and Tobago National Committee on Reparations, of which Dr. Fergus is the chair, but we both work on this committee, I am the deputy chair, and also in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself, we are going to launch the second international decade for people of African descent. The United Nations in December proclaimed the 2025 to 2034 the second decade. At the event, we will have Dr. June Suma, who is the chair of the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And on an international level, we see the establishment of the Permanent Forum as one of the major outcomes of the decade. And it is the forum itself that has pushed and advocated strongly and has been successful in having a second decade proclaimed. So Dr. June Suma, the chairperson of this organization, she's already here in Trinidad and Tobago, and she will be delivering the FITIA address. But we will always also have presentations from our chair, Chair of the National Committee on Reparations, Dr. Claudius Fergus, who is here with us. I myself would provide a presentation on what has been accomplished by civil society organizations in particular in Trinidad and Tobago during the decade. We also are going to have with us the chairperson of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, His Excellency David Commission, and we would have Dr. Rosemary Bell Antoine, the principal of the University of the West Indies. She also would speak at this event, and it would be formally launched by Senator the Honorable Amy Brown, who is the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs here in Trinidad and Tobago. We would, of course, have entertainment. You know, we don't do anything without the culture. So we would have the Sour South Cultural Organization providing us with drumming and dancing. And we will also have a beautiful young sister, Shakira Burton, doing spoken word. And then we have our young panelist, Judah Barker, who is going to provide us with instrumental music on our national instrument. So it's going to be a wonderful afternoon, because it starts at 3. It will be at Dagger Hall at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, and we really welcome all. You know, the event will be recorded by Trinidad and Tobago Television, so we do hope that following that, it would be available as a YouTube event on their YouTube channel, and hopefully we can share it to ours. Yes, so that's the program. That's what we are going to present.
Yeah, and Isaac, when we review what happened in the first decade, you know, some of the experts think that it fell short of its ambitions, particularly where governments were concerned. What are you looking forward to in the second decade?
Well, I think that our advocacy needs to be stronger. And we have the people themselves have to become more invested in it. And that's why it's so important to raise their own consciousness, because if we as a people are not invested in the decade, if the decade is not perceived to be important to us, then the pressure on the government is not as it should be. So I think that the advocacy from civil society organizations and sort of rallying our people to be more, what we would call it, vocal about the decade, understanding, I think, the objectives of the decade better. Because I do not know how many people would have actually read the program of action that was proposed for the decade. That they understand all the elements of what was meant by recognition, the themes, justice and development, so that they could have identified with it. So you see, if our people are not identifying with what the decade is trying to achieve, then they have become quite indifferent. And of course, once they are indifferent, you're going to find the same happening at the level of government. We know it is an issue that concerns African people. Nobody's be jumping around and be very enthusiastic about addressing those. And therefore, there has to be strong advocacy for it. We have to put pressure on the government for them to recognize that this is a United Nations proclamation. It's a proclamation that would have been agreed by the General Assembly, of which they are members. And it specifically states what the responsibilities of the governments are. So I think that we have to strengthen very, very much the advocacy and be very clear about the things that we would like to see happen. We should push to have a national planning committee, as was done in the Year for People of African Descent, so that there's some entity that is going to supervise what actions can take place. So that's one of the things I think we should try to ensure, that a national planning committee should be installed for the implementation of actions that are pertinent to the decade. And that planning committee should comprise representatives of the government and civil society.
Isaac, one of the things about previous times when there was a heightened consciousness in the society was that, the racism was clearly evident to people. Yeah. The UN Permanent Forum really centers on ending anti-African racism. Yeah. But today, in the 21st century, that racism is largely structural or systemic.
That's right.
And so, it's not easy for the average person to identify how it is that, structural inequalities in education, healthcare, housing, economic opportunities, and political representation persist in a society like ours. What are we going to do as a civil society to help them bridge that gap?
Right. So if you noticed, one of the decade comes with this, what you would call it, line of confronting the legacy of enslavement and colonization, and working towards reparatory justice. So it has sort of put the goal of this decade into those words, so that we are looking at decolonization. It is it's a word that is being used a lot. We have to, again, as you say, explain and have people understand what we mean when we talk about decolonization. Like the work that you have been doing about decolonization of our spaces, our institutions, our minds. I think we have to start thinking of that. I think the concept of decolonization being more modern and more, in some people's mind, being more present, I think is something with which they can identify better. That the challenge that we are having is to decolonize, and of course the whole issue of reparations. But yes, there's a need for a lot more outreach. The work that we are doing on our programs, the work that we are going to be doing with the schools, the work that the National Committee on Reparation plans to do in communities, so I think that there has to be strong outreach. I think people are ready for the conversation. I'm not so sure if they were as ready 10 years ago, because a lot of things happened in the last 10 years that makes this issue of decolonization, I think, very apparent to persons. Sometime in the past, you mentioned these things to people and they are not so sure. But almost everywhere I go and I say it, people, yes. So I think that people are beginning to connect with their reality and this whole issue of decolonization. And then they're seeing what is happening, like in North America, they're seeing the pressures, you see? So, it's only when we are under a certain kind of pressure that we pay attention, you know what I mean? And therefore, some of the things that are happening globally are making this conversation even more pertinent and relevant and easier with which they can identify.
You want to?
Yes.
Yes, Sister Zach, definitely there are so many interconnections that it's difficult to, separate the decade from the other streams of reparatory action and movement, as you correctly would have done and in relation to Shabaka's comments as well, because you can't separate the decade from the reparations movement itself, from
All
the Caribbean Freedom Project, because you would be
yes,
left with an empty shell. Sort
that's
of
right.
I think that was part of the deficiency in the struggle for let's say the realization of the first decade, the realization of objectives that these tie-ins weren't properly integrated into the decade in a conscious manner, that these things needed to be mobilized by somebody, as you suggested, some task force, some kind
Yes,
of institutionalized
yes,
framework must be made in order to
yes,
channel, to guide and direct the 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 objectives, the struggle as such,
yes,
because it's a struggle.
that's
It's a
right.
struggle,
Yes,
and unfortunately, perhaps that all our history and achievements are informed by struggle. But in terms of registration,
yes,
tell us a little bit about that. Is there still room for interested persons to register
yes.
for the event on Friday?
Oh, definitely. If you go to our Facebook page, you would, once you see the flyer, an event has been created about the event. You can, once you go onto the Emancipation Support Committee page, you will see the flyer, and the link to register is also there. Now, we also want people to call our office 235-5008, and if it is you are having any concerns with respect to registering. But we also don't want you to feel, because the reason, one of the challenge, the purposes of registration is actually to control numbers, to get a sense of how many people will be attending, and also to gather information rather than have people register at the event. But so we do not want people to believe, okay, if you don't register, you cannot come. Yes, please still come, even if you were not successful in doing the registering process. We cannot yet say, okay, there'll be no room. So it will be room. We are sitting for persons who may just want to do walk-ins. So please feel free to walk in, but you can also call us and let us know so that we can guide you should there be any issue with respect to numbers.
Okay, so what about people who are interested in the launch but they cannot make it to the venue physically? Is there any sort of opportunity to take in the event live, virtually?
No, it will not be live. Trinidad and Tobago television will cover it, and they will show it on a subsequent occasion. But it will not be live. But you will have a chance to see it. Stay tuned to TTT, and they would let you know when it would be aired. TTT has been our partner in many of our activities, and they are partnering with us in this regard. They are going to cover it live, but they won't be able to show it live because of conflicting programming at that same time. But what they are going to do is show it on a later date. And once they let us know as well, we will promote the date and time so that you will be able to tune in and look at it.
Was there consideration given to live streaming it on ESC's platforms?
No, we
Or
did
was
not,
that feasible
because
at all?
yes, yeah, it requires for it to be done well. It requires a substantial investment in technical arrangement. What we will do, we can do snippets and little videos, alerting people, keeping people up to date. But we will not have the whole thing live. But we would do little posts in between, alerting people of what is happening. Yes.
Okay, so we look forward to seeing everybody on Friday,
Definitely,
3 o'clock,
please.
Dagger Hall at the University of West Indies for the launch of the second decade for people of African descent.
And
And
according to our dear brother Tracy Wilson, let us mind our business, come to the event, and take care and pay attention to what's happening with our people and how we can all contribute. And I will try, as we spoke here, Dr. Fergus, to make the point about us having a national, and I think at the TTNCR we should advocate for that, to having a national task force or planning committee set up particularly to oversee actions related to the decade. And we will present to you some of the actions that have already been done, not coordinated as Dr. Fergus said, but as we go forward, that we can take that approach and therefore be able to better account and for the success of the second decade. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you very much, Madam Chair, CEO. I don't know if you want to stay on for the interview that is coming up. Of course,
No,
you are free
yes, I would
to stay.
listen backstage, and I have to
Okay,
do some management in the back there.
okay, great. Yes. So at this time, we would ask Renee to bring our guests up front and let us have that conversation. Yes, so there they are. Welcome to Indaba, and thanks for consenting to share your knowledge with us this evening. Dr. Gwen Nuñez-Gonzalez, of course, is on your right, and she attended the University of North Florida, Jacksonville, and in 1993, graduated with a bachelor's degree in business administration. She has a master's degree in education leadership, and that was obtained in 2003. In 1998, she obtained a certificate in leadership and management from the Belize Teachers College and obtained a doctorate in organizational leadership and higher education from the Nova Southeastern University. Her dissertation focused on intercultural bilingual education. And of course, she's involved in promoting and teaching the Garifuna language. She is involved in promotion, and presently she is the operational manager of the Euromen project. I presume that's a Garifuna word. The Euromen project. She is co-chair of the Guna Language Commission and the founder of Furunde Garifuna and the GNG publications. Forgive me if I pronounce those words incorrectly, and correct me when you get the opportunity. Dr. Garrey Dennie, our next interviewee and contributor to this evening's program, is an associate professor of history at St. Mary's College in Maryland. He obtained his PhD at the Johns Hopkins University and has published original scholarship in the politics of death. Yes, you heard me right. The politics of death in modern South Africa. He was privileged to serve as a speechwriter for Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela of South Africa, of course, the great anti-apartheid fighter and first post-apartheid president of South Africa. He and his co-authors are currently writing a multi-volume history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And quite appropriately, volume 1, which I believe would be out not too long again, that volume would focus on, or has focused on, the history of Native genocide and African enslavement in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So that's the brief bio we have on our two guests this evening. But let's begin with understanding your involvement and interest in the history and development of the indigenous peoples of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Why is this story important to all people in the region, not only to St. Vincent and the Grenadines? I should have said, she didn't put it in her bio, but Dr. Gonzalez is a Garifuna, and Dr. Dennie is a Vincentian citizen, resident, both in the United States and St. Vincent. I've met him a few times, so I can say I know him fairly well. Dr. Gonzalez, let us begin with you. Your interest, naturally, of course, because you are ethnically Garifuna, but in studying this history and the development of the people, what got you involved, and why is their story so important to all of us in the region?
All right. Boite Guyon, good night. That's in Garifuna, Boite Guyon. That means good night. Well, for me, from ever since I was a little girl, my grandmother and the Garifuna leaders in our community always spoke about our history and the wars that the Garinago had to endure in Yurume. And they always spoke about Baliso. And the older I got, the more I got interested because I got involved in the preservation of the Garifuna language and culture. And in so doing, there was always this desire to know more about my roots from Yurume. And Yurume is the Garifuna name for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And when I got older, I was privileged to visit Yurume and then Baliso. Now, learning about the exile, because when we were growing up, they were telling us about Exodus. But when you look at the definition of the word Exodus, it cannot be Exodus. That's a wrong word. False education. And so exile, the barbaric way that they did. Dr. Dennie will talk more about that because he's the historian. I can only report what I've been reading and from the different symposium that I've attended and my reading and visiting the island and hearing from my people. So it is important to us because we are a part of that infusion. And when we look at our culture, the Garifuna culture, and all that it entails in terms of our spiritual practices, in terms of the language, all that is embedded within the language in terms of respect for elders and each other in general, in terms of how we speak, because with the Garifuna language, we speak differently to our elders in some words than to our peers. So it is important that we maintain that. And it's also important that as the descendants of those who were exiled, that we ensure that people know our history and that the younger generation understands why we fight, why we continue to stand firm about being a Garifuna. Now, the Garinago, we are an infusion, I call it. So we have our African roots and we have our indigenous roots. And some of the language, some of the words in our language, they have the Arawak origin, some from the Carib. We have some that we have the French influence when we really study. And then some of our practices, we have to look at it and see how we identify with the original ancestors. So when I went to Trinidad, then it really hit me that indeed we are the descendants of these great people, but we are an infusion of them. So some of the practices that they have, that they continue to do, we still do, sometimes in different version. Then I watch the similarities. So it's very important that as people of the Caribbean, that we identify ourselves with the different groups, and that will bring more clarity to ensure that our culture survives and the importance of its existence.
Okay, before I ask Dr. Dennie to introduce the topic from his perspective, now tell us something about origin of the Garifuna on the island of St. Vincent. This traditional story is that, well, I should say the received narrative, the one that most commonly known, is that there was this shipwreck and that Africans survived. I find that to be a fishy story, because if a ship, a slave ship, had wrecked there, then it means that most likely that the Europeans would have come after the Africans to round them up at some point in time. But by the time we see the first references to the Garifuna, they were already spread all over the island. So the story of the shipwreck just doesn't cut to me. Now, my theory is that the Garifuna are more likely to have been descendants of the Mandingo voyages that were launched out of Mali in the early 14th century. There were 2 voyages that were sent out, right? 2 of them. They never came back. There's no narrative of their return. In fact, from the first voyage, 1 ship came back and reported to the emperor that there was this river in the middle of the ocean, and they were sucked into it, but his boat managed to escape and return. Now, it has been proven by oceanologists that, in fact, oceanographers, that there is this powerful Canary current that can really take a boat across the Atlantic from the Canary Islands. That is my story. Besides, it has been said of Columbus and his diaries that he kept seeing, Mandingo people in Panama and different places. Tell us briefly, what story should we believe about the origin of the Garifuna people?
We should believe the story that you're talking about, not the one in the shipwreck, because here in Belize we are taught about this shipwreck and it's in writing. But when I learned the slave trade and how our African brothers and sisters were packed and chained, and I don't see how a chained person would swim to shore in shackles. I don't see the sense in it. And having attended the conference organized by the Urume Foundation, there were some researchers who did a presentation on how the Black influence came about. Now, that made a lot of sense to me, because if there were voyages in that area, I can see then how when Columbus spoke about people of dark color that he saw, that it made more sense, right? And we were never an enslaved people. Now, whether some Africans who were enslaved on nearby island escape and join, I can see the sense in that. But before that, the Garinago came about because the mixture of the Arawak and the Carib was already there, and then the Black mixture came about, and so we have our own language, we have our own culture in terms of the different dances, the different practices. For example, with the food type, I see it with my Kalina brothers and sisters, the baking of what we call ereba, the cassava bread. That process, I see that as being across the board, right? So the origin cannot be from any shipwreck. So we have diffused that.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, those of our audience who want to follow that story, you can Google Abu Bakari II, the voyages of Abu Bakari II, or go and read Ivan van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus. Dr. Dennie, what is your involvement and interest in the history of the Garifuna people? As an academic, I believe, as you said in your bio, your specialization is on the history of death and so on. But you have written also on the Garifuna. So, what is your interest in the story of the Garifuna as a people? Dr. Dennie.
We're hearing you, but far, Dr. Dennie.
I'm not hearing at all. We're not hearing you.
I can hear him, but like from he's
No,
far.
well, I can't hear him at all. So I would ask Renee to try to sort out that problem while we address another issue. So Renee, if you're hearing me, please try and sort out that problem so that we can bring Dr. Dennie on. Right now, Dr. Gonzalez, right? I'm correct.
Gonzalez, yes.
Gonzalez, right. Now, I consider that genocide on Baliso as a pivotal moment in the history of St. Vincent. Now, under CARICOM's 10-point plan, they identified genocide, in fact, the weaponizing of genocide as critical to Britain's imperial interest. In other words, mass killing was important for them to establish their dominance in certain places. I want you to tell us, why were the Garifuna singled out for extermination? And how did they survive the complete extinction in Baliso? I believe they were left there to die. Once you know the island, there could have been no other objective than to leave them there to die.
Yes.
And of course, the same general that killed Chatrier and mobilized the transportation to Baliso is the same general, Ralph Abercrombie, that captured Trinidad the following year and imposed Thomas Picton on the colony, the most tyrannical governor we ever had in Trinidad, reigning tyranny on the Africans in particular and the people called free colors at that time, the mixed race people. So tell us, why were the Garifuna singled out?
Okay.
What really happened there? What really happened there?
All right. So there were a series of war, right? And then the French came to, and they wanted to conquer us, but they didn't succeed. So the French kind of became friendly with us and were on our side. Then the British came, and the British saw that we were not an easy people to just conquer, and they wanted our space. They wanted our land. So they burned the plantation. They destroyed properties. And so because they saw that they couldn't conquer us, then their idea was to, all right, get rid of them. So Baliso was a camp for prisoners of war, and some of those prisoners were also taken to England side, and we're seeing evidence of that now. On Baliso, when you go on that island, it's to me, the feeling that I get, it's ironic that it is so beautiful but so sad because of the genocide. They wanted to finish us off. So there are different figures that we've learned about: 5,000, 4,000 something, 3,000, different figures that were on the island. And when they got there, many died starvation, the yellow fever, and just pure, I guess, after all the anxiety and the stress. But when they saw that the Garinago did not die, they put us on Her Majesty's ship and sent us a sail. There wasn't any destination. because when you go somewhere, you know, okay, I'm going, I'll catch this bus or I'll fly and I'll come back. So that's why you can't use the word deport, and they can't deport you from your place. So they set the Garinago a sail to no destination, but briefly they stopped up. They stopped at in Jamaica, we were told, and then they ended up in Rotan. So that is why we still have a Garifuna community in Rotan, and from there they went to mainland. So they attacked us because they saw that we were not easily defeated. And there's this story that the paramount chief, Chief Joseph Chatoué, who is our hero, had a sword fight with somebody, and then they killed him. No. I learned when I went to Urume that the man was ambushed. Right? And we are blessed to still have this connection with our ancestors. I remember an ancestor came through. We call it Omeha in our culture. That's when the spirit uses the body of the living to manifest itself. And that ancestor told us that the African connection that we have is from Mali. So when you said that, my mind went back there. So that is where the Garinago came from. And we also have a part of our ceremony called Mali, and that's the most sacred healing part of our Dugu ceremony. So it is important for people to understand that their intention was genocide. But the Garinago survived because they worked together. We are communal people. They work together. And then the culture and language survived because of the exile. Because our brothers and sisters in Urume, they were not allowed to be themselves. Those, I was told, ran behind the hills. So that's why we still have Garinago there. But we who came, they came with their language, and although they still suffered some oppression, they maintained their language and their culture.
Yeah, Dr. Dennie, are you able to communicate now? How is your sound?
I don't know. You can tell me.
Right, you're hearing. Okay, I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you great now. I'm hearing you great.
I'm using my
Yeah.
phone.
So back to just tell us your involvement in the history of the indigenous peoples, and then go straight on to tell us about your what you know about Baliso, and of course, if you can contextualize it in terms of reparations, I'd be happy, and then we can bring Shabaka on to join the conversation. Yes, so go ahead.
Well, in Vinciland, studying Caribbean history, the first time that I actually became aware of what at the time we called the Black Caribs was in 1973, which is 27 and 25. That's 52 years ago. I was about 12 years old or so, and there was a book that we were using called The Rise and Fall of the Black Caribs, us in Vincent and the Grenadines. Okay. And we read that book. And after that book, there was nothing else that we learned about that struggle in St. Vincent. Okay. So we had a taste of this, but beyond that, nothing else. And of course, we have the people we call the Caribs at the time, who lived, in the, we call it the countryside, far out and away from the rest of us, and we knew them to be isolated. We knew them to be discriminated against, and to a tremendous extent, you would have to say that so-called Black Vincentians were complicit in the kind of discriminated treatment of the people we call the Caribs. So in that sense, we even had songs, calypsos and so on, that ridiculed these indigenous peoples. So we have to be clear-eyed about the history of colonization in St. Vincent and the broader Caribbean, and the way in which it damaged our minds to the extent that you can make an argument that Black people at times were complicit in the in oppressing indigenous peoples in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Okay, but my first awareness of their presence as within the school system would have taken place in 1973 in the in reading that book, The Rise and Fall of the Black Arabs of St. Vincent. Now at UE, Kevin, I did a first degree in history and literature at Kevin, and we did absolutely nothing about the Garifuna. Zilch, zero. And so what triggered my renewed attention in this subject took place really 25 years ago when we had Garifuna people returning to St. Vincent. And what to me was just utterly astonishing at the time was to be aware that having gone to South Africa, and when I arrived in South Africa, for me that was I'm returning to the homeland. This was a sacred moment to be in South Africa, to be part of that struggle in the manner that that befell me. And so I returned to St. Vincent and discovered that the kind of reverence which I possess for Africa is the kind of reverence that the Garifuna possess for St. Vincent. And I did not know that. And the vast majority of Vincentians did not know that. Exactly. Even after having read The Rise and Fall of the Black Arabs of St. Vincent in 1973, it didn't tell us that. So for me, I understood in a gut-wrenching way that Vincentians were in effect custodians of a sacred heritage, guardians of a history, that we were not simply the sole possessors of this land, but that this land was in fact in trusteeship by us for those people who saw St. Vincent as sacred land. And hence, my commitment to begin to think and research and write about the Garifuna. In fact, my first presentation on the subject would have taken place about 2012 or thereabout, and I called it, from the reinvention of Châteauguay, from villain to hero, because once we elevated Châteauguay to national hero, that's a transformation in our understanding of the place of Châteauguay, given the history that we have had, where for basically 200 years, Châteauguay had been the villain, he had been the criminal, and he was a metaphor for every bad thing that was associated with the indigenous peoples. And yet, in this new moment of Vincentian history, he had become a national hero. And so I began that kind of history, looking at the transformation in the historical consciousness of Vincentians as expressed through our elevation of Châteauguay into national hero, and so on. So that in part is what has driven me over the past 2 decades or so. And but I have to say this too, because this is actually quite important. And again, as I did this first degree in history at K-Ville, and I was taught by Beckers and many of our stalwarts, men for whom I have obviously the deepest respect. And what I did not know is that, and what I need to make clear here, is that Barbados was the first slave society in the Caribbean. That is true. St. Vincent was the last. But here's the point. St. Vincent was the last because Barbados was the first. The proximity of St. Vincent to Barbados, that was the trigger that allowed Africans who arrived in Barbados to seek freedom in St. Vincent and to hold on to that freedom for nearly 200 years, while other Caribbean islands who were further away became part of the domino of being transformed into slave societies. The work of the Garifuna, that integration of indigenous peoples in St. Vincent and Africans who arrived in St. Vincent, that collaboration was absolutely crucial. St. Vincent was an ideological statement, a testament to Black freedom, a testament to Africans' fortitude in standing against slavery. We have to understand that Barbados became a slave society by the 1640s. St. Vincent does not become a slave society until 1806, after the defeat of the Garifuna and then the transformation of those lands into parcels handed out to the victors from the battles. And so to understand that prolonged holding off of a slave society in St. Vincent, not slavery itself. There were slavery has different forms. We have incidental enslavement. We have a society where you could have a society with slaves, but a slave society where every element of the society is utterly controlled by the capacity to extract from that labor and to put in place the laws, the ideologies, and everything that we see in Barbados and Antigua and elsewhere. That does not happen in St. Vincent until 1806. And so St. Vincent ends up with the shortest time as a slave society in the history of the Caribbean. And so what we have to
bring in Shabaka now. Let us bring in Shabaka now. We are near the top of the hour when 91.1 my sign off from the program. We will continue beyond that, but let's bring in Shabaka now. Shabaka, unmute.
Just to quickly, reiterate for our audience what was revealed here tonight, that Ralph Abercrombie, who came to the Caribbean in 1795 as part of that British expedition to put down the revolutionary emancipation that was sweeping the Caribbean from Grenada to Haiti. And this Ralph Abercrombie would have gone and invaded Trelawney Town in Jamaica. He would have put down revolutionaries in Grenada. And of course, he attacked the Maroon community of the Garifuna people, who had won a treaty with the British since 1772. So he breached this treaty, invaded the community, as Sister Gwen Gonzalez says, and ambushed Chatouillet and killed him. So there are two questions I want to ask our guests. One is, how do you feel knowing that another country in the Caribbean honors Ralph Abercrombie, the man who killed the great Chatouillet, with a street in the heart of the capital city of Port of Spain? I want you to think about that. And the second question, we know now that when Abercrombie, with Picton in tow, of course, that is our former governor Picton, when they ambushed Joseph Chatouillet, who they could not defeat in open battle, they would have killed him and taken his calabash cup, a sacred artifact of the Garifuna people. And that cup, we now know, is held in by the West India Committee in London. There is an address. We could go to it. We could find this building, and we could go and visit the Chatouillet Cup. So two questions. How do you feel about us celebrating Ralph Abercrombie in Port of Spain? And two, when is the Garifuna community and when are the people of St. Vincent going to call on the people of the United Kingdom to return that sacred artifact to the Garifuna people?
Well, the Abercrombie stuff, that one is pretty easy. I was in South Africa at Cape Town University when we took down the statue of Cecil Rhodes. There are statues which have to come down, and that would include any kind of value that being attached to Abercrombie.
Yeah, but
the principle is the same.
I think the people of Trinidad and Tobago need to understand how it makes you feel to know that your great hero was slaughtered by this man, and we utilize our own money to maintain a monument or some kind of honor to this man.
I think I think you actually have to go beyond that. It's not about how we feel as Vincentians or as Garifuna people. It's how we as Black people and as Caribbean people feel. This was an assault against the integrity of Black people to construct and maintain for themselves, a civilization that is free of enslavement. St. Vincent, as I said, stood as a symbol against slavery. So this is not a Vincentian issue in and of itself. The battlefield was St. Vincent, but the fundamental problem, the struggle that was taking place, has to do with Black freedom. So we are celebrating, in this instance, in the context of Trinidad, a man who was antithetical to everything that Black freedom means. So as I said, we took down Cecil Rhodes' statue in South Africa at the University of Cape Town. There are many statues we need to take down in the Caribbean. Abercrombie is just one of them.
Yes.
Mhm. And I believe that if there's a street in his honor, there has to be a renaming. Educate people why. Because when we look at the African struggle, we look at the Caribbean struggle because of the conquerors, right? They have played on our minds, and that's what I see across. They worked on our mind, education. They were successful in reversing, although some by force, some know they're not forced, but they naturally see that it's better. They think it's better than what they have as indigenous people or people of Caribbean, right? So I believe that the idea of honoring somebody like that shows the disconnect that they have caused, and they're successful in divide and conquer. Because if the leaders across the Caribbean would understand the atrocity that this person did, then although it didn't happen in their turf, they would have seen the bigger picture. And I am just hearing about this cup because growing up, you hear about this sword fight, and then I got older and I said, no, it doesn't make sense. So I researched, and going to Urume, going to that conference was an eye-opener for me, right? And then I learned about the prisoners of war, they call our ancestors, who were left on Baliso, and some were taken to England. So we have to do a re-education, and it has to do with the mind and attitude shift so that they can see the bigger picture instead of only looking at your individual community. That's why.
Just to add to the information, there's a book called The Black Ghost of Empire by Chris Manjapra. And this recent publication, he speaks, he says quite clearly that they have also identified the remains of revolutionary leaders, revolutionary emancipationists from St. Vincent and Grenada, who were imprisoned by or captured by Abercrombie and taken back to England. And those remains are now believed to be held in a provincial museum in Britain's Devon coast. So beyond the cup, there also remains of actual, African revolutionaries from that period in a provincial museum in Britain's Devon coast. How do you both feel we should treat with that as a region now in the 21st century?
Well, again, there are some principles here which are pretty pure. One of which, the return of all artifacts that belong to us.
Oh, correct.
The return of all persons who belong to us. These are not things we need to compromise on. These are not even things to debate. The idea that our people should be on exhibition, in a museum for British consumption. I mean, that might have worked very well in the 18th century and the 17th century and the 19th century, even in the first half of the 20th century. That is not something we should tolerate now. So,
Yes,
so we should demand the return of all important historical artifacts
let me
and
just get
and the bones of, of those who belong to us. These bones are testable. We can test them. We have DNA capabilities. We can know if they are originally of Garifuna ancestry and so on. So there are things that we can know, but the principle is not something that we need to compromise, which is the return of all artifacts which belong to us.
And I agree with Dr. Dennie, because we are now in an era where we have the know-how. We've been having the know-how, right? But now we have technology, we have the space, and we have a level of freedom that we didn't have, that we can now collect what is ours. Because even in Belize too, there were some Mayan artifacts that were sent away, right? So the reclaiming. So there's a process, and we must start that process because it's our history and it's very spiritually important to us. And for our generation as well to understand and see the significance of what we're doing, then what is ours must be brought back to us. We must be the custodians, the caretakers of our property, our ancestral property. That's how I see.
Well, I will just throw it out that the Caribbean Freedom Project, and I'm sure the Emancipation Support Committee would be happy to work with you in that regard to see those important artifacts and even the bones of our ancestors returned to their rightful place in the Caribbean for where they can be properly treated. Now, on the last question, as we're coming down to the end of time here from me, the Garifuna story is not only one of tragedy. It is, in my own personal experience, one of triumph. I have been to the coast of Honduras, to La Ceiba, to witness the proliferation of the Garifuna people there. And that, of course, is the closest point to Roatan, which you mentioned. And I've met our brothers and sisters right up the Caribbean coast, from different parts of the Caribbean coast, from Belize, from Guatemala, and so on. This is a story of triumph. Tell our listeners a little bit about how the Garifuna people have persevered and where they are today in terms of their own trajectory of development.
Okay, no, we are now in a space of appreciation and awakening, because from Urume we have been oppressed. When they got to Roatan, some of them went to mainland Honduras, and on mainland Honduras they met the Spanish War. Because some of them sided with the wrong side, they were actually massacred. They were told to dig their grave. They stand there and they were shot and fell right into a hole. They cover you. So some escaped. That is why some of them escaped, and they went to Livingston, Guatemala. Some Garinago are in Barrios, some Nicaragua, and Belize. However, based on what information shared with me by an ancestor, that we're also along some of the islands. Because like what he explained, he said, I may live, I can talk about, I may live in Urume. So I'm from there, but then maybe I went across to Barbados. I like it, so I stayed there. And then I invite other relatives, and then they stayed there. And at a conference, some people also brought evidence that their great were from the Garifuna background, right? And we have survived because of the mindset. There's a Garifuna mantra, Aubon Amurunu, I for you and you for me. Exactly what it means. And I've seen that growing up in the village where I grew up the Garifuna town and the Garifuna village. Everybody, we were raised by the entire community. It had its good and bad, because when you're found doing something out of the way, you can be punished there. They carry you home and they punish you. But when there's a need for either you're sick or the people go to the farm, they came and they shared their produce. So that communal spirit has allowed the Garifuna people to survive. Here in Belize, for example, when the Garinago got here, they were allowed to settle in the south. And looking at the map, we weren't really part of what you call Belize. No, it has merged. But the Garinago could not be on the streets of Belize City. That was the main hub. After 6, without a permit, they were jailed like common criminal. And
Apartheid.
Yes. So the conquerors, those leaders, the British leaders at that time, saw that these people of black origin, these free people, never enslaved, these free people are here. And then they had the black people, the Africans, who were working with them, enslaved. They didn't want this connection, so they used divide and conquer. So it is still here in the country, subtle in some places blatant, but because we believe that we must stand firm together, we are communal people. That is why the language, although it's suffering, but there's a revitalization, and I'm a part of that movement. We're teaching Garifuna in the schools. We have some challenges, but today I was in one of the Garifuna communities in the village, teaching the teachers how to teach Garifuna to the students and teaching them as well Garifuna. So that inner drive, right, has always been. And like what Dr. Dennie said, Yurume is dear to us. Baliso is dear to us. From a little girl, we've heard it. There's so many people from Belize that's on their bucket list to reach to Yurume and to reach to Baliso. And we have been to Baliso because we honor the efforts of our ancestors, and we believe that we don't die, we transform. So the physical dies, but the spirit, the soul lives on. And then so we have been there to do healing. And I didn't go to that part of the island, but some went and they said they found human bones there, right? And believed to be the bones of our ancestors. But like I said, I didn't go to that part. I wanted to go way to the tip top. So I went to the top of Baliso to see the whole area. And the irony is so beautiful and yet sad. So the survival also has a spiritual rootedness, because we are a spiritual people. We pray to this great spirit. Some people call him God, we call him Bungyu, right? And some may call other name, but that's the great spirit. And we are also guided by the spirits of our ancestors, because they believe in that great God, and they always focus on prayers. Prayer and pray and pray and pray. Everything we do surrounds prayer. And our healing as well has helped us, because healing is not only physical, it's also spiritual. So there are prayers, there are herbal bath that we take, there are certain direction that we have to follow. So all of that have helped in bringing us together and allow us to stand firm. In Belize, November 19th is a significant day. It's called Garifuna Settlement Day. Our forefathers fought to ensure that we're given the recognition, because here the brighter minds, the males, they were plucked out of the Garifuna communities and they were sent out all over Belize to educate others at the expense of their culture in many cases, right? So we have been able to survive because of the passion that we have to go back and back to Yorùbá and also revive the culture and the language. I've been 2 years ago. I was in Yorùbá teaching Garifuna in some of the communities. We stayed there a whole month, and the others who have done that.
Doctor, you mentioned the praying, but you didn't really mention the culture. I have visited your communities and I'm familiar with the rhythms, the unique African rhythms that are still remain. And I've participated in some of the dances.
The festivity, yes.
that can really move the soul.
Yes, the drums, those drums and the sistera, they do something.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but is it called punta?
Punta.
Yes.
Punta, and that's one of the most popular, and the paranda, right? And that is the punta is normally was normally used at the festive time after somebody dies. We have 9 days of prayers, and on the 9th night we call it Beluria. That's because we believe that we've helped the soul to cross over. Whatever cleansing is needed, we've assisted with that spiritual cleansing. And so there, on that night, there's festivity, drumming. And in the original days, old days, we didn't have any electricity like now. So campfire. In my village, I remember campfire, and then drumming and dancing and storytelling and feasting and just this merriment from the night till the morning. And then we make something called aruko, and that's an altar decorated with crepe paper of all different colors, and so that then at the break of dawn, all of that is taken to the grave of the deceased.
Yeah, and you guys have a special brew called Gifiti as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, Gifiti is bitters. We take the bitter stick and some put alcohol in it, some don't. But our main Garifuna drink is what we call hiyo. And that's from the rough part. After you grate the bitter cassava, and then you use the roguma to take out the liquid, which is deadly, the poison. And then that dried sibiba is sieved and then baked. So the rough part is also baked, and then you soak it. So put a little salt, you put that what has been baked, what we call hiyo as well, and then you grate some ginger, and then you grate sweet potato, and leave it to brew a little. You can do it overnight. It becomes a nice drink, just like tambran drink that at least that's the closest I can match it with. And then you can leave it to ferment, and that becomes Holy Ghost fire.
Well, you're giving away so many secrets tonight, but I would advise anybody to go on and visit you guys and experience the culture. It's wonderful.
Yes.
Yes, so we have to wrap up in the very shortest time. Shabaka, could you check the chat and see if there is any question anybody has posed for our guest? I don't want to touch my phone. There were echoes of Ubuntu. Dr. Gonzalez, there were echoes of Ubuntu in that statement. You said, I for you and you for me. I couldn't help thinking about that. Now, let me just invite you. The posters are going up as I speak. There would be an Indigenous Peoples Conference in Trinidad in October of this year, right? The call for papers are out. They're going out this week. We have started already. So you can look out for that. I would send them directly to you too, so that you can think
Good.
about participating in that conference, right? I wanted to end on the high note that Shabaka mentioned there on the triumphs and successes of the Garifuna, but he brought it up already. Of course, there are many highly educated Garifuna wherever they settled, and of course, Dr. Gonzalez is a living example of such. So let's have the final comments by our guests this evening before we close this edition of the program. Since Dr. Dennie hasn't spoken for a little while, Dr. Dennie, final words, or what should we be looking forward to? The government has acquired Baliso, and we expect a monument to go up there. In fact, the whole island is a monument, a living monument to the people, the Garifuna people. I think we should be looking forward to that, not just the bare island alone, but something, on that island. Perhaps if they can get the 5,000 names or so, or as many names as they could, that survive, at least the descendants of those names. I'm sure there's surnames that would have survived that that tragedy there. But something needs to go up. Some monument needs to go up on the island as a monument itself. Something. Yes. Final words, Dr. Dennie.
Well, the reclamation of Baliso as part of St. Vincent's national patrimony, it's a monumental act. When we speak of reparations, this is one instance where we ourselves are in control of how we act to restore dignity and to give reverence to the people whose lives are stayed forever on Baliso. Okay, so in and of itself, just to strip away, to destroy forever the notion that you could turn Baliso into some kind of commodity to be bought and sold, to be privatized. The fact that we have said as a people that this is sacred land and would be so in perpetuity, in honor of the lives which rest there, that in and of itself is a monumental act. Okay. As to what we do in the future, the Prime Minister said that there are things which need to be done. For instance, I've been to Baliso. Okay, and you have to get off in the sea to get on. There's no harbor. There's no pier. There is no walkway. There is no pipe. There is no shelter. There's absolutely nothing. And so the space exists to do precisely what you say. How do we transform this land into consecrated soil? How do we memorialize it? What do we put there? And so there will be a committee that the government has said will be put together of people who are invested and interested in how we chart our path forward. But we could pause for a moment, if only to say that the reclamation of Baliso is a historic occasion in the history of reparations for the Garifuna, and it will be forever be remembered. Whatever we then do in the future to consecrate that land.
Okay.
Closing comments, yes, Dr. Gonzalez.
Okay, and I must agree with Dr. Dennie, because when I got the message that the Prime Minister was true to his word, when we went there in 2017, he promised us. We had a good meeting with him, very welcoming, and then he said, I promise you, I will do whatever is in my power, whatever it takes, to ensure that Baliso remains for the Garifuna people. And so when I got that message, I was overwhelmed with joy and pride, and I even posted it on my Facebook page. That is a man of his word. So the onus now is on us to educate the people in Yorome, because we met many on our journey there who had no clue that we existed. here on this side. They didn't even know the Baliso story. They didn't even know about the Garifuna story. And so we can't be mad with them. So I told my crew, we need to educate. And so that's what we did. And so I believe that education is the key. And we now have this opportunity to make a difference and make a profound statement by supporting the movement on Baliso and doing our part as Garry Nago. Aubon and Murunu. In the Garifuna context, we don't have borders. Once you reach in a Garifuna gathering, all of us are one, we speak the same language. And we do not look at borders. So in Urume, that's our homeland. We value it, we cherish it. It's our spiritual ground. So when we say we want to go, we're going home, that's what we mean. Not a literally to stay there, because home is not where we are, but that's our ancestral home. And we value that. I want to thank you for this opportunity. It's opportunities like these where we can get another audience, because we have our own audience in our space. When we can get another audience to educate so that they can learn and pass on the knowledge and at least ignite interest as well, so that it can fly. And that's what we want. The more you release what you know about who you are, the more power you're releasing, because you're empowering others, and the message takes on its wings. So thank you for this opportunity. I thank God for you, and I thank God for our ancestors who are opening doors for us as Garry Nago to many mediums to ensure that our language, our story is heard from our perspective, because we have been hearing it from the perspective of those conquerors, those who write using words that have their own negative connotation on us. So this is our time. We embrace it. Ceremony hu lo lubaf bungyo ita memo luba bungyo abiniro lagle hadu be swa gamba banwa same one again home. So ceremony is thanks.
Yeah, you don't have to translate that. I can feel the meaning of it. And I want to thank you on behalf of the Emancipation Support Committee for being with us this evening. I'm sure we are all better off, much more educated on the indigenous peoples, particularly the Garifuna experience. And we want to thank you for that. And Shabaka, anyone we want to recognize in the chats this evening? That's your duty this evening?
Yeah, so quickly, let me just say that the prevailing sentiment is one of gratitude for the research and the knowledge that has been shared tonight. But there is a gentleman who wanted to make it known that even though the information is so edifying, he wonders about, its impact, because so many of the young people, in his words, could care less about these kinds of subjects. So that's something that we have, a challenge we have across the board in our communities. I also want to take the opportunity to apologize to the Garifuna community here in general. I want to set a tone. Those of us who I don't necessarily, I tend to see myself as coming from descendant of Maroons. But those of us who have descended from those who were enslaved on plantations have been known through the process of colonial epistemic violence, that is the miseducation of our people, to treat our Garifuna brothers and sisters in horrendous ways, and to speak to them and to treat them and to ridicule them and so on, to participate in the attitudes, to take on the attitudes of the colonizers. And so tonight, in a very just sort of symbolic way, I would like to, on behalf of all that, of those people who have been through that process, which has made them ignorant, to apologize to you, my brothers and sisters, to apologize to the Garifuna community for the way that ignorance, colonial miseducation has made us treat with you guys over the years, and to make a promise as a member of the progressive community to continue to re-educate our people in such a way that we can really come together in a spirit of oneness moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Appreciate it.
Thank you all, and to our listeners and viewers, see you next week. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for staying with us. See you again next week for another exciting edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows. My brother, good night, good evening, good morning, wherever you are.